Erin Magill, you served as production designer for the limited series Dead Ringers, which is inspired, of course, by the David Cronenberg film of the same name. Now, where would you say your production design pays homage to Cronenberg, and where would you say it deviates?
Yes, of course, it's a very iconic film, not only for Jeremy Irons' performance, but for, I think, a lot of the visuals. The red, I think, being of huge importance. Obviously, our brilliant costume designer, Carrie Langerman, incorporated that with the scrubs. And therefore, I think the biggest thing I paid homage to, I guess I would say, would be a bit of the darkness that exists and a bit of the Italian postmodern style that was existing in the twins' apartment. I thought it really lent itself well still for who these twin sisters are, being these very godlike doctors, very sterile, very cold, lots of reflective materials that we could use with that. So that was a bit of our inspiration from the original, for sure. Yes. And then deviation, obviously, sorry. The deviation was obviously, I think the biggest thing was going to be, of course, through Alice Birch's brilliant scripts and that female lens that not only she had written, but then Rachel would be performing. And I think the biggest difference, again, was kind of knowing this idea that the body horror was actually just showing birth itself. It wasn't actually showing mutilation. It was really going to be showing this process of what birth is and the mess of that, along with the mess of kind of these very codependent sisters. And so a lot of what I was trying to do was really give, I think, this believable canvas background for that kind of mess that was going to be evolving on screen, whether it was a sterile hospital or their home or the very believable kind of generational wealth we saw with the financiers they were trying to get money from.
And when they finally opened their birthing center, it's one of the major locations of the series, and certainly one of the most visually arresting. It sort of walks this fine line between our world and almost futuristic and otherworldly in certain places. What did you hope to evoke with those spaces?
Yeah, a huge part of that came from, again, where they started, and we meet them as, they are supposed to be the best of the best. They've worked their way up, kind of the American dream. They're working, we took inspiration from Mount Sinai, Lenox Hill, all the top New York hospitals, and what those OBGYN and wings looked like for that initial Westcott Memorial Hospital that they're in. And so starting there in a place that was very, this kind of bureaucratic maze structure that was definitely constructed by men, less concerned actually with the process of birth and more about getting bodies in to make some money off of them. And so it was a lot of what we had discovered really existed there, and kind of then going for the complete opposite and leaning into, yes, what we are seeing in some of these, I would say birthing centers and more bespoke places that are being built today in this very kind of more private and definitely more almost spa and resort like, for good or bad, I would say. And then again, because of the nature of, I think, our story and where we really go, it was, amping that up a little stylistically about, 5-10% more to help with the drama and the nature of what happens in the story as it goes on, and especially in those environments.
And the show also has this, twisted sense of humor at times. Did you hope to bring that humor into any of the designs, any of that kind of, eeriness and humor?
Yeah, I would say that, again, most of it was, there was so much brilliant humor in the writing itself and obviously in the performances. So it was, if anything, it was going to be definitely more subtle. I mean, I think, of course, there's so much in the Parker estate, and in a design aspect, of course, is that very large portrait behind Rebecca during that pivotal dinner scene that was, I would say, the most on the nose kind of joke from the set dressing. But because of that, I think we did try with the Parker estate, especially, and the Parkers, as kind of this idea of this, mega generational wealth, kind of Sackler-esque family that I think, what could that wealth look like? And the idea really to us and kind of who she was is she collects wives, she collects causes. So she was an art collector. So to a degree, we tried to, especially with that initial painting inspiration from Alice's script, try to lean into, I think, a lot of, while very valuable art pieces that we were lucky enough to rent, kind of ones that I think lent a little more comical to me of kind of the absurdity of just, again, the absurdness of the wealth that they really have and what's going on and the control that they have kind of in this medical world.
And in that Parker estate, there is that, incredible dinner table scene. And there are other, important scenes that take place over dinners and with
Yes.
lots of characters convening. What are the challenges for a production designer in scenes where you have so many characters and angles to cover?
Yeah, I mean, well, specifically the Parker estate, again, I could read, it could be a published short story, the dinner scene alone. It was like, I think it might've been 12, 15 pages. And it was hysterical. And so because of that, we definitely, and we had found a location for the rest of the estate. And we knew that, there was just production limits that we would need to build that dining room. And so that's definitely something that, and the architecture of the location itself, was this historical, wonderful place out on Long Island. And, there was nothing to kind of connect. It made sense to me to kind of go underground, also knowing some of the antics that get into the game later when through tunnels and whatnot. And that I kind of like this idea of an underground cave, but skylight, but, wine cellar. Maybe it's a bit, of, very high end kind of bomb protective shelter, whatever, just this idea of going underground that would then allow Jody and Sean and Alice to, have complete control and enough space for the actors too, so that we could capture that very hilarious dinner scene.
And what was your collaboration like with the cinematographers? Because you're creating these sets and locations, and then of course, have to decide how to light them, how to capture them on camera.
Yeah, it was, I was very much working with Jody and then Laura as well. And, I think the lighting is something from the original that I think we all consciously and subconsciously were definitely going to take was, it is rather dark. And I think that lends itself a bit to this idea of New York and the city that never sleeps, as well as this idea of the twins being doctors and this idea that, we never quite know what time it is because they have such insane hours and a lot of the binges and psychological stuff that is going on. And so when talking about that, again, the lighting for me was, we wanted a lot of what I was doing to be grounded in a certain level of reality, but building in elements for obviously Jody and Laura to be able to tweak and play with, such as the kind of Terrell inspired light above the mantle in Beverly's bedroom. That was a bit of this serene, this thing that was supposed to almost calm her down in her Zen-like bedroom state, but that they could tweak the lighting as things went on. And and just going from, I think, the hospital where we really leaned into this kind of dark, older, again, bureaucratic maze, and then into the newer hospital that was supposed to have more space and light. But as things began to kind of, I think, progress or digress as the twins kind of their relationship unraveled, we had built in a lot of lighting that allowed Laura to have a lot of fun, I think, with what was going on with the twins and their unraveling.
Was there a design or a build from the season that stands out to you as maybe your favorite that you're especially proud of?
I think their apartment, probably, because just I think it was this, while it might not be as flashy as some of the, I'd say the birthing center, I think the apartment to me was this, I really like to design something that, while it might appear like it's just a very high-end apartment on the Upper West Side, there was definitely a psychological reason for every single, the reason why we placed Elliot's bedroom that would be more towards the alley, and Beverly's bedroom we built more with the light, and the idea of them sharing this Jill and Jill bathroom, and all the details that really went into all the shapes and textures, that was really just trying to be emblematic of these very complicated sisters and women. So that was really the one that meant a lot to me.
I want to congratulate you on your work on the show, and thank you so much for talking with me about it today. We'll talk to you a bit later for our group session.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Francesca di Mottola, you're the production designer for The Great, which recently returned for its third season. First off, how does the season start for you and your department? Like, do you get the scripts first, or do you have conversations with Tony McNamara about what the season will need? What happens at the start?
Absolutely. So we start having conversations often quite early on, and Tony doesn't necessarily have it all planned out from the beginning. So he has an idea where the season might go, and he just throws some ideas at me, and which usually, I mean, it's happened for season 2 and specifically season 3, where I get sort of very excited and sort of start dreaming up new builds and new spaces, and sort of it's quite a funny process, because then I go back to him and sort of sell back his own ideas in the shape of spaces. And sometimes he's already moved away onto a new idea, and I sort of have to then, follow him. And so it happened with season 3, where, I sort of was very excited about the idea of just building a whole new wing of the palace, where Catherine and Peter sort of get together in this season after going through a lot of turmoil and trying to kill each other. Catherine trying to kill Peter at the end of season 2. They're sort of together, and they're not happy in each other's apartments because of the history that they carry. And so we sort of ended up creating a new apartment, but the way we got there was, through a lot of conversations and me pitching crazy ideas, where Peter was like this crazy decorator, whilst Catherine was sort of focused on reigning. And so it's all sort of coming from his ideas, and then it goes somewhere, and then it sort of reigns back and becomes something else. That often happens.
And the relationship between Catherine and Peter is, of course, quite turbulent, to say the least. How do you, try to reflect that, in the design of that space they shared all of a sudden?
Yeah, so the point is exactly that. They didn't share a space, so they each had a wing since season 1. We established that sort of Peter goes and visit Catherine. Catherine sort of goes into his bedchambers. And therefore, I think I sort of tried to enhance that it's in the dialogue, and it's in the scripts, the fact that they sort of talk about being not completely happy in each other's space. And Catherine, in the beginning of season 3, in the first episode, they're both waking up from where we left them in season 2, sleeping in Peter's bed. They both have a sort of a knife under the pillow. So they're clearly like sort of not trusting each other. And that space comes with sort of trauma from what happened there. And then they sort of move into Catherine's bed, and in the design, her original bedroom was a chinoiserie wallpaper with lots of birds and beautiful hand-painted trees, and we just added birds to that wallpaper because Peter speaks of his trauma of being closed in a bird cage by his mum, and so he has trauma of birds, and he can't be in that space. So they then move into a new wing of the apartment, which used to be his dad's wing, and finally they find some balance in that space because it doesn't belong to either of them. However, Peter then there's a whole storyline that opens up with them moving into this old apartment because he starts being chased by his dad's ghost. So that was a storyline that was fun to explore. which is why it didn't really work for them to sort of build their own apartment together. We need a sort of history of what these spaces could mean for Peter. And so, yeah, it propels the story forward.
And how many other new builds did you have to create for season 3?
Yeah, quite. So as part of Peter the Great's apartment, it's a whole wing. So what we do see of this wing is the bedroom, which is like a whole apartment itself, composed by this big sitting room, a bedroom, and a study, which becomes Peter the Great's study becomes Catherine's study. And then it opens up into what we call the games room. And so it's this sort of quite giant space, a big hall essentially, where again, it was a space that had been closed for years and that they sort of restore and open up through a big dance scene. And that's where they have they do lots of things in this season in this one space, from having like your classical Russian sauna to playing badminton to having all sorts of games in that space. So that was one big build that we really enjoyed, specifically creating for this season.
The show takes liberties with history. It very much plays around with history. Were there new references and inspirations that you brought into this season from around the world and across time periods that were new this season?
Yeah, I think it's when we're sort of confronted with the scripts and the idea of new spaces. It's just so open. There's no, most of the time, it's really what we want to tell with what we want the space to tell or to sort of add to the story. So the research is so broad. And I was just looking at a number of palaces and I can't even start, I think that the Royal Palace in Stockholm was a great source of inspiration for Peter the Great's bedroom, just because the royal bedroom in that palace, there was one specific bedroom where I just thought the way the room was divided and the colors and the tones were so perfect for us. But I stumbled across that image and so I don't know, it's really very open to the point where you need to, I have to find myself a place and a time to stop looking for references and images. And I guess some palaces in Germany were also the source of inspiration for new salons we created. So it is really open for the research to go in so many different ways. And even for the games room, I was looking at a specific palace in Italy called Palazzo Te, which just had the most beautiful frescoes and the paintings of these wonderful, enormous horses by Giulio Romano, which I reproduced on the walls of the games room, because the games room is also where Peter spends most of his time trying to create the perfect European horse. So he brings in the two perfect horses and is desperately trying to have them mate. So in this space, and it's just so open to fun research. And it's difficult to say where I start. I guess it's somewhere of architecture and art history references that I know from my upbringing, and then I sort of space out and rein it all in at some point. I hope it makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm just struck always by how ornate and just detailed all the imagery is. What's the process of creating, gathering, props, decorations, artwork? What is that process like?
Yeah, so specifically going back to the new apartments, the actual architecture and the build is ornate to a point that when we found ourselves dressing it, we just needed almost minimal dressing, because there's so much that is going on the walls, like from patterns to pilasters. There's 50 pilasters ornate the walls of that bedroom, and the pilasters themselves are decorated by sculptural elements, and then which took us a really long time to sort of find the right balance for how ornate we could go. And I just wanted more and more. And at one point it was like, it was so ornate to the point that it kind of became kitsch and ugly. And that's when I knew it was right. And so with the dressing, we sort of had to rein it back a bit. And it's just it's a very organic process, the way I work with the other sort of heads within my department, the set decorator, the prop makers, the scenic painters, everyone sort of brings something to it. So the new apartment has this, I think, really beautifully executed bas relief of Peter the Great on a bear. And that was sculpted by one of our sculptors and painted bronze, and then it gets changed because they try to sort of make the room more theirs and get rid of the presence of Peter the Great. And so they bring in a family portrait where Catherine is standing up holding the globe, and Peter's the one sitting down on a chair actually holding their baby. So there's always this play with their roles being sort of, she being the one who's reigning and Peter being the man who's taking care of their baby, the dad at home, and sort of a little bit bored with his day-by-day routine. So he's inventing flavored salt and whatnot. So there's a lot of play with their couple marital balance, which is fun to sort of what design can bring to it, and that goes from the designing of food, the designing of specific props. So it sort of permeates everything.
Well, congratulations on your work on the show throughout the years, and particularly in season 3. And thank you so much for talking to me about it. We will talk to you again soon. Maya Sigel, your production designer for Hello Tomorrow, which takes place in a futuristic version of the 1950s. What were your initial thoughts about being able to blend the retro with the futuristic?
Yeah, so I think my initial thoughts, luckily, really were in line with the directors and the showrunners, in the sense that we wanted it to be this retro futuristic world that was imagined from the lens of the 1950s. So everything is really kind of grounded in the picture of the future as you would see it in the 50s. And that's sort of where I started with the research process as well.
And where did that research take you? Like how deep into like the rabbit hole did you go for a 1950s Americana?
Very deep. And it never stopped. You know, I was on the show for about 9 months, and you know, I started the research before I started prep, and you know, I didn't really stop until the very end. And really it was so fun to look at all of these old films, old animation from the era, lots of catalogs, World's Fair photos, postcards of roadside architecture, you know, and I looked at a lot of photography and architecture books as well. And yeah, there was just really sort of no end to where we could grab inspiration from, which was great.
Now, since this is an alternate version of the 1950s, were you able to take, you know, more liberties than you might have? Were this not a straight period piece, you know, besides the robots, of course?
Yes, absolutely. So that was really freeing as well, because, you know, it's not a strict period piece and it's not a documentary. And so there was just really, the playground was a lot larger for me and my team. And so I really kind of pushed everyone to look from really the 30s through the late 60s when we were looking for inspiration and research. And so we would just, you know, I want to sort of use things that felt like they were part of the era, but it could have been, you know, we could use something and modify it that was a prop that maybe was manufactured in 1965, and that was okay. That fit into our world. And really one of my biggest inspirations was really in the gadget design was the Art Deco era, at the streamline movement, and looking at all of this. It was this period of where designers were making everything look like it could fly, and everything had this sleek aerodynamic shape to it. So I thought that really worked and spoke to our gadgets that are mostly hovering in our world.
Now, the show really immerses us in this world from the very first scene with Jack, played by Billy Crudup, doing his sales pitch for his timeshares on the moon, and it's this diner bar that has this, again, this retro futuristic kind of vibe to it. How important was that space, and what went into creating that?
Yeah. So are you referencing sort of the first time he meets the customer at that diner bar, or when he's in the rotunda, sort of that first bar? Yeah, when he gives him the pamphlet. Yeah, so what we loved about that was to sort of setting it in this classic East Coast American diner, and then adding something like, I knew that I wanted to have an automat somewhere in the show, and that is heavily featured in the bar of the Vista Motor Lodge, which is our main set. And so once I sort of had that design element there, I thought if we see any other bars, it should also have something of that as well. So you have this, plexi box with all of the drink names and the bottles upside down, and you have our bar bot that is sort of going back and forth behind the counter of the diner. And it's also kind of grounded in our warmer color palette in our show is used for the earth. And then everything that's a little bit more futuristic and of the moon is sort of in a cooler palette. So in the diner, you have, it's very warm, but then you have that plexi and some of the shiny surfaces that we use in our futuristic elements.
Now, you mentioned the Vista Motor Lodge, where the much of the show takes place. Characters spend much of their time there. I understand that lodge was built for the show. How big an undertaking was that, and what did you want to bring to that?
Yeah, so that, from the minute I read the pilot script, I knew that that was really our anchor, and that we were going to be spending a lot of our season in the Vista Motor Lodge. And it just, even before we scouted, I sort of knew that this wasn't going to exist in New York. And so I was already thinking about what it might look like, and the different spaces. So, it's really design-wise, conceptually, the Vista Motor Lodge was the bridge for me between the two worlds, between the future of the moon and space travel and the old world of Vistaville. So you have these curved lines, you have the Vidicon booths in the lobby, you have the automat in the bar, you have, the bots running around and the gadgets. But it was also important to me to have, a lot of wood and earth tones, and my scenics did a beautiful job sculpting river rock, because that was inspired by sort of the googie architecture of the diners on the West Coast and the motels on the West Coast, which I wanted to sort of bring to the East Coast. So yeah, it was a really large set. It took up pretty much all of the space that we could use on our main stage. And we had the lobby, the bar, diner, a lounge area, the conference room where our team sets up to sell the timeshares, the lunar timeshares. And then you could walk through the hallway and down to one of our motel rooms. So it was really nice because it, you know, the actors and the crew really had a chance to set up shop there. And, you know, it was a really nice compliment to have directors come in and say, oh, you know, we still feel like there's angles that we haven't shot in here that look good. So.
And you know what makes the show futuristic, of course, is all the technology that we see interspersed throughout the series. What were some of your favorite of those details and gadgets and robots and all of those really playful elements?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I just loved that, from really in the pilot script, a lot of the gadgets are introduced and you can see them in the first episode. And there is this whimsical quality to them. A lot of the gadgets are sort of superfluous and they help people, but in these little ways that you don't necessarily need. I loved I think the first one that I really tackled were the Vidicons and the Vidicon booths, which are basically like the retro-futuristic version of FaceTime. And so it was really important to me to kind of establish that, and then we could go from there. And so the Vidicons are these clunky screens, they needed to have, I felt like they needed to have some weight. There needed to be all of these analog buttons, and we designed them on a wooden base so that they could also be practically mobile, and then we could populate the world with them. We had booths, they were in people's homes, they're just in public places all over. So that really kind of informed the rest of them. And then from there, another element that was that you can see in the designs of all the gadgets is the dome. And so our lunar residences are under a clear plastic dome. And I wanted to bring that to a bunch of the devices too. So, you see that when they're at the Jetball Stadium and they're having popcorn. There's, it's a self-popping popcorn machine, and you lift the dome off and you get your fresh your popcorn. It's called the Kernel Fresh. So yeah, all of those elements, they were all fun, honestly. And my prop master Eric Cheripka was a mad scientist, and really so much of it was done practically. And then our VFX supervisor, spruced things up here and there in a really beautiful way as well. But it was really amazing how much we were able to pull off.
Congratulations on your work on the show. And thank you so much for talking to me about it today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'll see you soon for the group. Ramsey Avery, you were the production designer for season 1 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. There have been so many renderings and descriptions of Middle Earth since J.R.R. Tolkien, created this world. How much did you draw from past references, and how much did you want to put your own stamp on this just incredible legacy?
The key element really was to find what that DNA of Tolkien is. I mean, there's definitely 80 years of art going back to Tolkien himself drew imagery that's really striking and graphic and wonderful. And of course, the Peter Jackson movies, everybody has a very strong idea of what the world looks like based on those. But those are 3,000 years in the future and are representative of a world of decline, as opposed to our second age, which is meant to be a world of kind of the glorious, the height of almost all the civilizations we're seeing in the second age. So it's really trying to find that through line that could honor all of the artwork, going back to the brothers Hildebrandt, who were the main artists for the world of Tolkien when I was a kid, up through Alan Lee and John Howe and the Peter Jackson movies, and finding that through line so that people would understand where we were, where we came from based on the emotional content of how the world that lived in their heads and where they knew we were going to go. So trying to find the key elements that would allow us to, in either broad ways or small ways, find the place that lived in our world. I mean, for example, we know that Moria, when we see it in the movies, is a collapsed environment. It's been destroyed. We also know it's happened after the dwarves, as Tolkien told us. They dug too greedily and too deeply. They delved too deeply and too greedily. So that represented a very kind of grandiose architecture that I wanted to dial back into the Second Age and show a much more sense of respect for the stone. So that was kind of in a big way. And in some smaller ways, we know from the Legendarium that Elrond, after Eregion is destroyed, he takes the remnants of the elves and he goes and he forms Rivendell. So I wanted to look at some of the details that were in the movies for Rivendell and pick up little bits of that within the design of Eregion to say that people who are paying attention, that you can see where Elrond got his ideas to build for the future. So it's looking at some of the stuff we know from the movies, looking at all of the art, and then looking at the words and what's the story we're trying to tell, and where is the reality with the nature of what the storytellers, the showrunners, want us to say, and finding how each of our environments fits into that particular expression of the Second Age.
Did you ever feel intimidated in any way to design in the world that has such a rich legacy and also has fans who kind of know it backwards and forwards?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't have approached it without certainly a healthy dose of fear. I mean, just simply, it is a very broad and very well-loved environment, and story and emotions are all tied to it. One of the things that eased that eventually was talking with the showrunners themselves. They clearly honored all of that history, and they wanted to make sure that our world honored that history. And more importantly, almost everybody I worked with, from the people who were on our crews, some of whom had actually worked on the third movies, or were the kids of the people who had worked on the Third Age movies, and trying to take what they would know and adapt that into what we wanted to say.
And Amazon invested a lot in this series, and you can really see it come through on the screen. Did you have a lot of resources and freedom on this project relative to other things you've worked on?
Well, I mean, I've worked on everything from movies that cost less than $1 million for the entire thing, and up to Marvel projects as well. So there's never enough money. There's never enough time. Whatever the budget allows, the producers in the story want more than that. So it doesn't make really any difference how much money or time you have. You got to kind of scrunch what you've got down into it. And, on one level of it, if you think about what we did 8 hours of kind of feature level production design where we had to literally build everything. I mean, we didn't have, even the forests in New Zealand don't look like the forests of Middle Earth. We didn't have an old medieval town on the coast of Croatia that we could go to. We had to build everything. And so the sense that we represented what was equivalent to the scope of 3 Marvel movies for the budget that I did 1 Marvel movie for. So you can imagine how much squeezing and thinking and reusing we had to do to be able to get that to work. The backlot set we built for Numenor had to be used and redressed and reblocked and repainted to become multiple environments. The dungeon set and the Hall of Lore and Celebrimbor's Forge are all the same set. So it's just a matter of trying to figure out how to dress and repaint and change a few walls here and there to be able to make our dollar stretch as far as we could.
You won an Art Directors Guild Award for the episode Adar, which you're also entering for Emmy consideration, and that introduces us to Numenor. What's the start? That location is so vast and hasn't been dramatized on screen before. Like, what's the starting point for envisioning that setting?
I guess there were a couple of places that we began from. There's a letter that Tolkien wrote once where he said to a friend, "I just got back from Numenor. Oh, I mean Venice." So that kind of gave us a little sense of what it was in his mind, the importance of water and canals and that sense of water being everywhere and that layering of history and that richness of different types of architectures and the sense that there's influences coming from everywhere to form what we see in the now of our storytelling. We also knew that it had to come from a place that it's very important that in the overarching of the storytelling that the humans of Numenor really resent the elves of the rest of Middle Earth. And the elves are the ones who actually helped them build the basis of Numenor. So we had to actually start with the idea of what was the elvish version of Numenor 2,000 years ago and work our way up through multiple histories. I developed a whole Bible of design that went through four various ages of Numenorian architecture, becoming less and less elvish and more mannish, and how that represented the idea of really rejecting the things that elves loved. And so going away from nature and organic forms into very blocky and strong and very solid shapes, and feeling that whole history of what the nature of what Numenor would be. And then again, trying to figure out which elements of it fit into the script that we had to support. I mean, there were multiple environments that we designed that never made it into the production, and and then we take parts and pieces of those, or we'd redress something or repaint something and be able to turn that into something that the showrunners did eventually need.
And what was the balance of, building sets versus, being able to create and extend locations with visual effects? Because it does look seamless when you watch it.
Well, a couple of things really helped on that level. The showrunners, when I first came on, they gave me like a list of 5 rules. And one of those rules was it had to be real. They did not want to do green screen sets. So fortunately, I was working with a couple of very strong visual effects people, Deron Ames as the producer and Jason Smith as the supervisor. And we just literally talked every day, once or twice a day, to figure out how we were going to make that blend. But the goal was, if it was within the strike zone of where you saw human actors' bodies, then it should be real. So we built an entire village. We built 5 acres of a backlot to do the Numenorian wharf and the town and be able to redress that and to make it into multiple things. We would look for locations that were as useful as we possibly could and figure out then how to hide the modernity behind it with using trees or structures and making sure we only pointed the camera in the right direction to make sure that we kept that. So it really was everywhere we could, we kept it in camera as much as possible.
And what would you say was the most challenging build of the season?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, just the very idea that we have to create the environment where the rings are forged. I mean, the idea of what does that look like? What does that mean to anybody when you don't even really actually forge rings? You cast rings. And so those are very different types of methodologies. And so working our way through that was a long journey. We building a ship, and what was a Numenorian ship. And we ended up building the majority of that ship and getting it on gimbals, and just that process of figuring out what that ship looked like and how it could not look like a pirate ship like we've seen a gazillion versions of, and what made it particularly Middle Earth. But then how did you practically make it in a way that you could put it on gimbals, you could put enough sails and enough rigging that we could have actual sailors as extras actually doing rigging. So again, it looked real. It wasn't just CG work. And then I think the certainly building the city of the Numenorian capital was definitely a challenge, just because it was quite a large scope, and the idea that we had to figure out how to make this look like all different parts of a city. I mean, our wharf, where we have all that water, actually is the exact same set that the cantina lives in, and that's made to look like it's actually on a bridge 300 feet above the wharf. So trying to figure out how to make those shifts and changes, again, to work within our framework of our storytelling and our time frame and our budget, and get the scope that keeps it as much in camera as we possibly can. That was very tricky. And fortunately, I had a tremendous amount of great artisans and great art directors and set designers to help work through all of that.
Congratulations on your work this past season. And thank you so much for talking with me about it. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Paul Cripps, you're the production designer for Ted Lasso, whose third season has been streaming this spring. Is there a sense of ease going into the third year of the show, or are there always new challenges and problems to solve?
I think there's always problems to solve, but I think going into the third one, it was more the expectation of viewers that we were going to do what they wanted. Everybody has kind of theories about how the series is going to end. Everybody kind of knows it's the last series. People had expectations of what would happen to the characters. So there seemed to be a lot of expectations that we had to provide a good season. And that was more the kind of worry for us all, rather than anything particularly production design based, I think. I actually felt quite good about going into the last season. I was kind of having a little bit of fun in that I knew by the end of season 2 that people really liked the show. So there was a certain amount of relaxation in terms of people liked the world that we built. And so we were maybe just expanding that a little bit.
And how did you expand that world? Like, what new sets and locations did you create, and how did those come together?
Well, we had elements of the story that had expanded. So Nate had become manager of West Ham. So we created some sets that worked for him as a working environment. We had to fit in with West Ham, the football team itself, which plays at the London Stadium, which is the former stadium where the 2012 Olympics were held. We also, this year, we had a deal with the Premier League and with all the teams, with Nike. So it was fitting in with those elements. So we had to fit in with the real West Ham team, and had to get approval for designs for that. And I just wanted everything to feel like it was in the stadium. And again, trying to make it feel like a real environment that Nate was working in. And then also we had Keely, who was a character who was branching off into her new company, her new PR company. So we had a new kind of environment for Keely, which was fun to design. So there were little branches off from all the characters, slightly increasing the world of Ted Lasso, but not by much, and still retaining the kind of elements that everybody was familiar with.
And is there a lot of work needed on pre-existing sets and locations when you return for a new season, like new dressings or the way things change?
To a certain degree. I mean, between season 1 and season 2, we actually took down all the sets because we didn't know if the show was going to get a second season, basically. But this year we left them all up. So there was a certain amount of revamping, but also football clubs change every year. We wanted to kind of slightly give it a further revamp in terms of FC Richmond. So there's a certain amount of rebuilding, and we had some new sets coming in. We originally had Sam's restaurant as a location, and because it was a lot more involved in season 3, we decided to build that as a set, an interior set, and we ended up shooting the exterior in the studio as well, and kind of CGIing some elements of the street into it. So there was always work to be done to improve what was existing and to just change up the feel that it was a new season and they were back in the Premier League.
You've been nominated twice at the Emmys for Ted Lasso, and this year you're entering the Sunflowers episode for consideration. That's the episode that takes the characters to Amsterdam. What about the design in that are you especially proud of?
I really loved that episode. We had a wonderful time filming in Amsterdam. We had a great Dutch crew, but there were elements that we had to do in London. We couldn't take the whole team to London, so all the elements with the major part of the football team were built in London, and we also built the interior of the houseboat in London. So it was just an idea of, having some great new locations, interiors and exteriors to deal with, but also to replicate some of the interiors back in London and trying to integrate that so it kind of works seamlessly. And there were quite some quite, tricky little things to do in terms of building a foyer that you can have a massive pillow fight in, which, is not easy when it's a big hotel space. So we built that into a conference space in a hotel, and we built what I thought was a beautiful little set for the interior of the houseboat. But it was just nice to deal with environments in a different country and had a certain different feel to that episode, which took us out of the kind of normal Ted Lasso world. But it was just really enjoyable.
And that houseboat is especially memorable because you're basically introducing a new character and establishing that character with a physical space. There's that scene where Rebecca is sort of getting to know him by touring his home. So what was it like to create that character through his space?
It's really lovely. There's also this idea of gezellig. I can't say it. It's the Dutch word, but it's quite difficult to say. But it means a kind of warm hug or a feeling of, being at home, or that feeling of being content. And the whole set was kind of supposed to replicate that or kind of represent it. And Brendan Hunt, who'd written the whole episode, has spent a lot of time in Holland. So I spent a lot of time talking to Brendan about, the ideas behind his episode. So that was brought in. And the basis of that was doing, a lot of research in Amsterdam, looking at various houseboats, but also doing some buying there. A lot of the props were bought from street markets in Amsterdam, so we could bring that flavor back to London. But it was just the idea that it was like a warm hug, a slightly retro feel to the houseboat, but you felt it at ease. And we wanted the idea that Rebecca felt, okay, this is a bit odd. I'm in some guy's houseboat. I don't know how I've ended up here, but there's actually a feeling of content, and this is lovely, and it's not threatening. And so it's quite a difficult thing to get into a set, but I felt we'd kind of achieved that.
And with the show ending with season 3, what will you miss about the show, about the experience and your work on the show?
Oh, I'll just miss the people. I think it was such a lovely crew to work with, cast and crew, and that's partially been an experience due to the reaction of people who watch the show. And I think that emotional response to the show is partly what everybody will miss. It's the people who work on the show and the response to it from people outside. And I've never really worked on a show where it's had that kind of response. And that's really what I'm going to miss. I mean, who knows? There might be another season. I'm not sure whether I'll be doing it. But, I know that I've had those 3 series and I've had that interaction with both the cast and crew, but also with people I've just met on the street and talked to about the show, or I've talked to online. And that experience has just been transformative, to be honest. Even for me, after working in this industry 30 years, I've never had that response from people about a show they've watched. So for me, it's just been amazing.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work on the show, these 3 seasons. Congratulations on the nominations you've received, and thank you so much for talking with me about it.
Thank you.
Shayne Fox, you're the production designer on season 4 of What We Do in the Shadows. What was it like coming into the season as production designer after working previously as a set decorator?
It was amazing. It's a show that's close to my heart that I've been part of since day one. So it didn't feel stressful or scary. It felt right and fun and like an amazing opportunity to do some really cool stuff.
Now, at the very start of the show, you've got the start of the season, you've got the mansion in disrepair. So you've already got this incredible visual piece for the show. Is it fun to take a familiar location, and then show it in such disarray?
Fun, yes. Scary too. I mean, the mansion set is iconic to the show, and there we were taking sledgehammers and sawzalls to it. So that was a bit like, really, are we really doing this? Because we didn't have the space or the funds or the time to build a replica and destroy it. So we kind of had to just destroy our iconic, you know, classic Shadows mansion set. So it was pretty nuts, you know. We added ceilings where there didn't used to be hard ceilings, so we could have disrepair coming down. We took out entire walls so we could see through them to the plumbing and to the decaying whatever was in the walls. We you know, we did the big tree coming through the fancy room, and then, you know, there's never anything above it, so I wanted to put levels above to be so we could see, like, you know, your shots going up would be full and layered and have like other floors that we could peek into. So it was kind of scary, but totally fun.
And, you know, even when you're not wrecking the place, does the mansion require a lot of, you know, updating from season to season? There's so much detail in there,
So much detail. No, it kind of just lives as is, you know, if it's not in disrepair, things just need to be cleaned up a bit, touched up, but that's part of the charm of the place, that it's kind of not, you know, really in the best shape all the time. So not much upkeep, just, you know, making sure that all the rentals are in place and everything is looking the way it should.
now, among the new settings for the season, you've got Nadia's nightclub. What inspired that space, and what went into creating that?
The inspiration is basically the storyline, you know, what the writers have put on the page, and how Nadia wants to open a nightclub and they're trying to figure out how to make money to fix the house. So we had, you know, the big vampiric sets, the archives, and we sort of redid them and turned it into a nightclub. Wanted it to feel like, you know, Studio 54 meets vaudeville meets vampiric land. You know, there were no real rules about it. We just, you know, I knew we needed to bring in some cool lighting and some dynamic elements that would just take it from the dark archives library that it was. And of course we needed the stage for Baby Colin and all the other performers and all the mayhem that happened in there.
Now, the episode that you're submitting for Emmys is the night market, and that location looks incredibly elaborate. You know, where do you even start conceptualizing that place?
That was a fun one. So that is probably the biggest install setup, most cinematic, most stunt heavy, most layered, most set dressing filled space that Shadows has ever done. I was sort of given a heads up about the night market early on, and it was just percolating for a while of how to do that. What is a night market? What would be involved? So there's a lot of research I created, you know, just collecting files for myself, not really sharing them wide at that point, you know, just inspiration images, just texture. You know, I would go down the rabbit hole of researching, you know, folk art, early folk art, and sometimes those early dolls were really kind of creepy, and that is like a whole tangent you could go down. And I just created images and files for myself, textures and possible elements that we could focus on, and just carried that research and kept that all in mind while we were looking for locations to do this in. Also knowing that budget was a concern, and we couldn't afford all these big and amazing things that I necessarily wanted to try and tackle. So how are we going to do it? So I worked closely with the set decoration team. Carrie Wiley is an amazing decorator, and she's so resourceful. She found a lot of amazing stuff, and that kind of sort of helped inform what we were going to do in the night market. And, you know, I started to think, okay, we will design all these separate booths, and it just didn't seem like a practical way to attack a huge space like that. So I sort of went to the theory of, okay, this is a night market that happens once a month. Maybe it's like a traveling thing. They go from city to city. What would they do? What would they have? They would probably have some sort of crude infrastructure, some sort of modular elements to then build booths from. So that's kind of what we did. I knew we had to go tall because the space we chose was humongous. So I designed like a modular system of cross pieces and uprights and bases and, you know, fire bowls and all sorts of things that could work together and interconnect. And I knew that it was kind of, you know, we had designated spaces where things were going to land, but I knew that we were kind of just going to wing it when we were installing it, you know, like, okay, let's build this high up on this end. And then like we'll know that the camera's going to be down there looking this way. So it's kind of like an organic thing. I built a base network for all the set dressing to then be on.
And you mentioned the stunt work in that episode with the fights between the familiars, which is such a memorable scene. But how do you develop a set? How do you work on a set with stunts in mind, with, you know, that kind of, you know, the safety and all the there?
That's a good question. On this show, our stunt team, super talented people. They keep outdoing themselves, so the stunts seem to get bigger and bigger. And you know, Guillermo Harvey's character is becoming more adept at these kind of things, so they can ask more of him and, you know, less of the stunt double. And we just work together. We figure out what are the parameters, what are the hopes and dreams, what can I do to help them, what do they need, what do we need to build triplicates of so they're going to smash into, you know, it's just an organic conversation. And it just comes from standing in the space, reading the script, dreaming out loud together. How big, how cool, how insane, how bonkers, how fun, how destructive, how many flames, how many broken things can we do? And we just work together to make it happen.
And with characters in general who have lived for centuries, is it hard to narrow down the sort of references and inspirations you take to, you know, into, you know, each given space, or do you get to be kind of like a kid in a candy store?
Like a kid in a candy store, 100%, because we're not tied to a certain period. We're all periods. We're historic, we're current, we're Staten Island, we're, you know, we're whatever we want to be. So we can steer it in any way. I mean, yes, we know the provenance of each character and where they're from and their backstory, so we can lean into that. Or we can just, you know, like you say, be a kid in a candy store and follow our noses.
And you know, there's so much detail in you know, as I mentioned, in every nook and cranny. What's it like, you know, just creating and obtaining these otherworldly materials and plot props and decorations for the show?
It's so fun. It's the most fun. I tend to like to create moments. That's just where I find, you know, obviously we have the big picture we deal with, but sometimes I really focus on like the moments that are created that a camera can find or that a character can settle into and get inspired by. So, you know, I'm really into beautiful lighting and beautiful fabrics and giant tassels and everything kind of just pushing scale a little bit. And sometimes in your face, sometimes more austere. You know, we just dive in and go where the inspiration goes. And sometimes I'll see a photograph, you know, the set deck buyers will show us pictures and they're trying to show me something. And I'm like, what is that in the background? That weird leather tooled thing? Like, we need that. And then that could just inspire a whole custom wallpaper, or I don't know. It's the creative process, and it is the most fun.
Well, congratulations on your work on this series, and you know, your work as production designer now, and as a set decorator before. And thank you so much for talking with me about it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
Welcome to our Meet the Experts TV production designers panel. I'm here with Erin Magill from Dead Ringers, Francesca di Mottola from The Great, Maya Sigel from Hello Tomorrow, Ramsey Avery from The Lord of the Rings of Power, Paul Cripps from Ted Lasso, and Shayne Fox from What We Do in the Shadows. Now, the work you do, the shows I just named, are so incredibly different from each other, but I imagine one uniting factor is the importance of having a really good collaborative environment with your teams. How do you approach your leadership role? Start with Shayne.
It's a good question. I think we're all nothing without a great team. You know, you need to have people who are inspired and talented, top of their field, which we're lucky enough to have here. Every set dresser, every wireman, everybody cares. And that I hope that shows on camera. I mean, there's a lot of the people here also my really good friends, you know, for a long time. And that that love, I think, kind of shows up on camera. At least I hope it does. So yeah, I mean, everybody has their role and everybody has their function, and we're pretty open here, and we listen to each other and work together. And I don't know, it's what I love most about this job is the collaborative nature of it. I've done other projects and other avenues of life that are more solo and more sort of diving deep, and just listening to my own brain all the time gets tiring. I want to hear what other people think, and I want to see their faces when we put things forward. And there's nothing more satisfying than spending so much time and energy and effort working on something as a collective, and then standing back one day and it's lit and it's on camera and you're looking on the monitor. Like, that's, I think, what we all live for, those moments where like, hey guys, look what we just did. It's pretty cool. So collaboration is key. It's everything. We're nothing without it.
Erin?
Yes, I absolutely concur with everything Shayne said. I know for me specifically with Dead Ringers, what was really amazing is one, just I think you're able, the team that we happened to be doing this during a very busy time. It was kind of coming out of the pandemic, and so there was a lot of work being done, and to kind of get the right team together. I was very fortunate that I think the scripts I had to kind of entice were just so brilliantly written. But then once I got that team together, I think it's just invaluable when you're all very much on that same page about the world you're trying to create from that starting point of the story, the same way that I'm collaborating with the showrunner, the DPs, and the director. I was able to go back to my team, my decorator, my art directors, my assistant art directors, and really, I think, empower them to, take some of their own creative license, because we, I think as Ramsey mentioned earlier, there's, no matter the budget, there's really never enough money and time. And so I think, it's really important to have a group of people that you can trust and you're on the same page, so that then, I might have a grand vision, and then I'm able to look to my team to, okay, how are we going to scale this down, because we don't have that much time, or we have to turn it into this 2 days later. And yeah, it's crucial to have that.
Paul?
Yeah, I would say collaboration, but also making a lovely environment to work in. I think a lot of time over the years, it's been difficult to retain people who you like, or retain a team that you love working with. And I think on Ted Lasso, we kind of led from Jason, where he's got such an attitude of everybody being so lovely to each other. And it sounds awful. It sounds so awful. But there is that environment that if you make it a really nice environment to work in, people want to come and work there. And I think that's so important in our business, because it can be so challenging. It's long hours, it's hard work. And I think if you can create an environment where people are having a good time and they seem to be producing something that's important to people, then you are going to get people who want to come and work for you. And I think that's so important. I've kind of changed in the years since I've been working. And I think Ted Lasso has been a bit of an epiphany, where you create something that's good because you create an environment that's good. And I think that's important. I've worked in a lot of environments of making shows where the environment has not been good, and people have left or they've become ill. And I think it's important to change that. So I think that's a really important thing that I've learned from doing this series.
Ramsey?
I think if any of us thought in the morning how many decisions we'd have to make during the day or throughout the process, we just simply would not get out of bed. And the idea that we can actually, we can rely on people that we've grown to trust and that we brought in to help us out, to help us get through that process. There's simply, my brain is this big and the project is this big, and there's just no way that I can do all of that. So part of the idea is casting the people that you want to cast, and sometimes you can't. So finding the right way to bring out whatever you can in those people to bring them into the team, because it is so much about the days are hard and they go on forever. And there's another day after that day, and then another day. And the whole idea that we just have to find an environment, like Paul was saying, to say that it's in a pleasant place to work and that everybody is valued. I mean, I was stunned that the photographers on our project actually took the time sometimes to go into these extreme close-ups where the embroiderer's work would shine, you know, and it was just so great to be able to go to that artist the next day and go, do you realize what we saw yesterday? That time you've spent weeks embroidering that pillowcase, and it was there and it looked great. And being able to bring everybody along on that ride with us is just, it's really the only reason. I mean, it's great to work in this wonderful environment and get to do the things and meet the people and go the places we do, but it's so wonderful to work with the artists that we get to work with. I want to work with these people as much as I can, wherever I can, and find those equally enthusiastic and talented folk. It's just, it's the reason to do this.
Francesca?
I mean, I agree with everything that has been said. It's part of it's such an enriching process to sort of exchange ideas and open up, like to start with an idea that feels this small, and then it grows, and then sometimes it sort of completely develops into something totally different. So I think going back on a third season of a world that was created sometimes by a different team, but having people that have come back with me and sort of welcoming new team members and sort of trying to bring them on board and hear out what they have to say to add to the world that we have created is so exciting. And I feel I've been really lucky in these last few years to sort of collaborate with amazing artists. And I can't be more thankful really to the artistry that has been brought, and with such excitement. And I think really it is up to us to create the environment and to sort of make sure that a positive energy filters throughout, like to construction, and it's such big departments that make these worlds come to life. So I think part of our jobs really, other than designing, is checking in that people are happy and they are working to the best, but their best potential. So.
In Maya?
So I really, first of all, what everyone has said is excellent. And I think one of the most important design decisions you make is really who you're bringing on your crew. And I was very, very fortunate on Hello Tomorrow with every person who was heading up the different departments within the art department. And, I feel like my role is always to guide the process, to give really clear communication and an overall design vision and sort of these marching orders, and then to really let people be creative and play and check in. And it's one of my favorite things, is to have everybody off doing different things and then to walk back into the office after a location scout all day and to have a line of everybody wanting to show me stuff and show me what they came up with, and really kind of curating that to work within the framework of the vision of the show. So yeah, I love that. And the truth is really that, especially with this show at the very beginning, there was so much that had to happen in order for us to be able to shoot on the first day. And so much of it was front loaded that it really was like we were like a creative design lab, and there were people working on gadgets and people working on different sets and people looking towards future episodes. And everyone really just gave it their best, and people were so excited. So
I have to say, Maya, I'm the exact opposite. I'm really rubbish at communication. So people have to go off and do their own thing anyway, because I'm not very good at telling them what to do, but I'm quite good at making decisions. So when they come back with something, I can say yes or no, but I'm not the best at communication. So, well done to you, because I find that quite difficult.
And one more question for everybody is, being, that you're creating these spaces that these characters live in, has any of your work influenced your own personal design aesthetic? Start with Francesca.
Not at all. I don't know. I feel like I don't take enough care in terms of like what is my personal spaces enough. And I throw all of my sort of energy into work, and that I often surprise myself in that way, in which I should spend more time sort of curating my personal spaces, whilst I try to sort of keep the spaces I inhabit quite minimal. And I've got everything I need in a sort of harmonious way, but I think especially like comparing my world to the world of the great, where it's like ornate and like there's never an end. I used to be a bit of a collector and a hoarder. I also live very close to Portobello Market, so that was a little bit of a problem for me. And so I had to sort of overcome that problem. It was a bit of a problem, and I sort of shoved it into work, and now my spaces are clean.
Maya?
Well, I think it's a tricky question with this one, because I think it's already sort of an era that I love and gravitate towards. I think there's always a bit of your sensibility that goes into the project, whatever it happens to be. And maybe a little bit on the reverse too. I think for me, when I'm really immersed in something, regardless what the world is, you find the beauty, and you find a way to make something cinematic and beautiful. And so sometimes, afterwards I'll come home and I'll be influenced by it. But for the most part, not so much. It's usually the other way around.
Ramsey?
I spent 2 years trying to figure out how to light everything with the sun or the moon or with flame. And it is so...
In your house or on a show?
On a show. And it was so amazing to finally take all of that and go, oh, I love electric light. I always thought I was somebody who did not like I wanted a candle flame. And like after 2 years of I want to figure out how to make practical light look lovely in my house and environments in my office, and offices and studios. It's almost impossible. But the idea of trying to go back now and think about how light really affects every environment we move ourselves through and our departments through, and trying to figure out the joy of electric light. That's something that was a kind of a revelation to me about the value of electricity.
Paul?
Oh, my house is a complete mess. It's awful. It's full of stuff I've stolen from shows, which don't match, and they're all very nice pieces in their right, but they don't go with anything. So it's terrible. I was hoping to take off some time soon to I'm supposed to kind of redo my house, because my wife is so fed up with me never being around that if I don't do the house, I think she'll have gone. So I need to do something with it, but I find it very difficult to do my own space. I don't know, maybe I need to write myself into the script.
Exactly. You need to create a character for yourself.
Yeah, I don't have one. So that, I mean, this is not my house, by the way. This is a hotel room in Croatia. But yeah, I find it really difficult. And also, by the time I get home, I don't want to do it. So it's a bit of a mess and eclectic, and every piece is lovely but doesn't go with anything else. So it's kind of eye gouging, I think was how I would describe it.
Erin?
Yes, I have share sentiments with many things people have said. I would say I'm definitely a bit of a collector that has recognized her problem and has been working on, I'd say, constant, probably after every time a project is done, to kind of do a bit of a cleanse. But I think the collecting in a way relates to my design, in that I do, I love the details of a story of something, and the things that I hold on to tend to, have a meaning, or from a trip, or something from, a family relative or something like that. But I will say, especially when it came to Dead Ringers, that was actually something that I think for me was kind of really fun about the twins' apartment, because they were so sterile, and there wasn't going to be something I really spoke about with Alice, this layer of personal history and texture that would very much be something like, if you walked into my house, it would be the complete opposite of them, which, in a way, it was very, I think, therapeutic and cathartic for me to kind of have that experiment of, really going for the minimalism and just focusing on the shapes and the proportions and the textures and the paint and wallpapers that we were using. And, then I've tried to use that back a little with myself, but I'm not there yet. And I definitely feel on the what Paul said in terms of, I've acquired many things through shows throughout the years that I try to make sense, but sometimes now I just try to get rid of them when I think it's time to maybe put that show in the past and really let all the baggage go from the show. That's
quite difficult, though.
Yeah.
And Shayne?
Well, I was just going to say, before I answer the question, I was just going to say that, it'd be so fun to do like a deep dive into production designers' homes, and like what kind of museums they actually are, of where they've been, like that chair was from that show that I hated, but I love the chair, it's just kind of funny. But I think for me, everything kind of is intertwined. I was a decorator for a long time, and I like stuff. I like curtains. I like carpets. I love furniture. I just so happen to really love Victorian stuff and antiques, and these are the things that I'm personally drawn to. So it's kind of like a perfect fit for me to be on this show, because we do lean into that a lot. But I curate it. Like, I don't want my house to look like the mansion or anything ridiculous like that. My curtains are long. They pool in my house, much to my husband's chagrin. He fights me on it all the time because it's hard to clean. But I'm like, you can't have curtains that skim the floor. Like, it, that's just who I am. So I love the old things. I love antiques, and I love things that are well made. And those are the things I'm always drawn towards. So they kind of overlap a little bit for this particular show. I don't know if I would have as much fun doing like a medical drama or anything, because I really like ornate stuff. But yeah, I think that answers the question.
I just would like to say, though, I am in a kind of, it's supposed to be a very nice designed hotel, and they do have lots of lovely stuff, but I've got to show everybody this one thing because it's just been bugging the hell out of me. And that's this picture.
Which is nothing. It evaporated.
It's like a silvery gray painted canvas with a frame. And there's a nice bit of art next to it, but I don't, it's not even covering something up.
It's a state of mind.
Exactly. I just thought I had to show something because it's been driving me mad for about 3 minutes.
I'll say another thing that I don't know if you all agree with this too, but I feel like I let myself play with colors much more in my work than I do at home. Like at home, I really want sort of a calm palette, and I don't paint my walls anything but white anymore. And then,
curate it. You pull the things that the bits might, mean something bigger to you, instead of having a whole room be, a deep jewel tone, right? I get that. My house
It's
too.
so fun in your work when you know, I'm like, that's where I get to play with the palette more, and add all those layers.
That's one of the things why by getting to go location scouting and seeing how everybody else in the world lives from various economic levels, it's fascinating to see how people use color in their homes and choices that are made. And some of them are like, oh, I would never think of that, but that's pretty cool. Not that I could do it myself, but that black room, like, okay, there's a really interesting idea there. But it's just, that's one of the things I really love about what we do, is those opportunities to see so much of what we wouldn't normally have an opportunity to see.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. I find color the hardest thing to do. I think it's really difficult. There's so many elements to think about in terms of, color tone, in terms of people standing out from the set, but also getting the right feeling of the set and the warmth and the cold. And then they also twiddle all the knobs in post and they change it. And that's something I've always struggled with. I think I'm getting better at it, but it's also such a learning curve as the technology changes as well. But it's the one thing I always struggle a little bit with.
Same here. I'm really scared of color, I have to be honest. And I sort of am reticent to go there. And I'm still waiting for that project that will sort of force me to do it. And so, yeah, one day maybe. But I'm just quite obsessed with texture and walls that have depth. So I'm, quite sort of interested in layering and darkness somehow. But color itself, I find scary.
Color's so dependent on the lighting too, right? Like you could have something in mind and then the DP has something else in mind, or on the day it just comes together differently. You're like, oh my God, I thought that was going to be so bright and I can't make anything out. It's all about the lighting.
I was just
I feel like half of my prep is like, here's the boards, and the DP and I are looking at like two of the same shades. It's like one shade. I'm like, so which one do you like? But they're basically two of the same thing. I
did a camera test once with a wallpaper pattern that was a really, really deep, rich green. And I was super happy with the green. And the DP just sat behind the camera and said, I think it should be blue, and turned the knob. And there it was. It was blue. Like, oh.
Yeah.
And that's
I don't know about
when you find somebody. It's like this show. I had done a previous show with this DP and the director of the first 4 episodes. So we trust each other, and it's like golden to have that kind of relationship. You want to keep those people forever, because that all of the planning that you've done is actually going to end up on screen the way that you'd intended.
what I was going to say, actually the opposite of that, which I'm sure you have all encountered. I was working with a first-time showrunner and a director of our first block who had never worked in television and only done a few films. And so there was a lot of, obviously with our limited amount of time in the TV world, but there was a lot of, I think, hand-holding to kind of when I wanted to make those bolder color choices in wallpaper that I'm sure you've all encountered, of kind of like how to convince them that it's going to look really great. And, whether it's a model or putting it up or, working in photoshopping images of locations, and just thankfully there was only one thing we had to redo, and one sad little headboard we made that ended up getting removed. But I always find that the most challenging. And so, yes, when you've worked with someone that trusts you and knows, that is a dream.
Yeah, and it's like, it's a back and forth too. Yeah. I feel like the more, sometimes the less ego I have and the more that I involve everybody, the better it is ultimately. And the more it's just an exchange of ideas and you come to kind of something in the middle.
Yeah.
But isn't it amazing when you do have their trust and, they let you do your thing and then everybody loves it? Like, that's a great feeling. And the more experienced showrunners are the ones who are probably going to give you that trust, right? Because they know she's the professional. She's got this. I don't need to, interject my own aesthetic viewpoint, I appreciate that.
I was also going to say that because Ted Lasso was an Apple production, we had quite a good budget. I tried to go green on all the building materials and the paint, and I used only eco-friendly paint, which I hadn't done before. And I have to say the color choices that we made on it, they actually just felt a lot better. I don't know if it was a kind of moral thing and it was just making me feel better, but if people haven't tried that and tried eco-based paints that don't include acrylics and stuff, it's really worth looking at because they're really interesting, and there's a certain tonal quality to them that is actually different and might be worth looking at. You might find it interesting, and it's a good choice to make. I was very lucky to do it, but I'm now trying to carry it on even though I'm working on a lower budget show, because I just think they're nicer tones as well and colors.
Interesting.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for talking with me today about everything. It's been such a wonderful, fascinating conversation with all of you. And thank you all for joining me, and have a great day.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.